Datuk Syed Zaid Alba, Chairman, Securities Commission Malaysia. Datuk Zainal Islan Zainal Abidin, Deputy Chief Executive, Securities Commission Malaysia. Sir Ian Cheshire, Chairman of Barclays Bank. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the first engagement of the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative. My name is Navina and I represent Capital Markets Malaysia, which is an affiliate of the Securities Commission Malaysia, mandated with the positioning and profiling of the Malaysian capital market. In July this year, CMM launched the MSFI, the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative, to support the advancement of sustainable finance amongst Malaysian financial sector intermediaries. The MSFI Steering Committee is chaired by the Securities Commission, and a little later on, you will hear from the chairman of the SC. But first, we are honored and delighted to have with us Sir Ian Cheshire, who is the chairman and non-executive director of Barclays Bank, to deliver a special address. Sir Ian, over to you.
Selamat petang. Very good to be here, and a real treat for me personally because I was actually born in Malaysia, in Miri in Sarawak, a very long time ago, I hasten to add. But it's very exciting to hear of the MSFI and the very supportive of the efforts around the world to develop this sector. I'd like to talk about maybe three things, and then we hopefully got some time for a question or two. The first is the experience that Barclays has had as a financial institution on the broad topic of sustainable finance, both as a retail bank and as obviously an investment bank. Secondly, what I'm seeing now in terms of the trends in the market and some of the opportunities that are happening as both governments and markets grapple with the Build Back Better opportunities coming out of the post-pandemic period. And thirdly, maybe a little bit more on the horizon about what might be coming, and particularly potentially wearing one of my other hats, where I chair the UK government's Global Resource Initiative Task Force, where we're looking at greener supply chains around the world, particularly on agricultural commodities, and obviously palm oil is one of those where the Malaysian government's been very active. And we're looking there at financial opportunities, new financial product opportunities, and ways in which the finance world can support a transition. So just to start with the first comment, I suppose the experience for Barclays has been that in the last 5 years, we've seen a rapid acceleration of interest in this topic. And I suppose if I could just take two sides to it, one of which is Barclays was the first retail bank in the UK to issue a green mortgage and also offer a green deposit products, both in shape of mortgages linked to energy efficiency in the home. And what that's taught us, I think, is that some people thought it might be a fairly niche subject. And actually, if anything, what we've seen, and maybe even more so with the pandemic, is a surge in probably the last maybe 3 years of real interest in the sustainability agenda in the broader sense of the word, and customers beginning to look at how they basically leverage their own financial arrangements in order to support things they believe in. And we're seeing that now with campaigns in the UK and elsewhere, like Make Your Money Work For You, focusing on pension funds. And whereas it might have been a specialist subject, certainly 10, 15 years ago when I was involved in the first bits of climate change work, it's now very much more mainstream. So I think we are seeing, certainly in the UK, Europe and the US, a shift of interest from consumers, and they're looking for ways and means in which their financial arrangements can be tied in with their sustainability beliefs. They don't necessarily want to be penalized for it any more than they want to pay more for a sustainable product, but they do expect us as financial providers to be active and to find solutions for them. So I would stress, I think this is a consumer opportunity as well as the institutional opportunity. I think on the institutional side for the IB, we've seen a very big shift along two dimensions. One is that as a group, as a quoted company, we're now finding that the shareholders who have been, 10 years ago, again, not very active in this, have become much more proactive in expecting us to disclose our financing activities. And on the back of Mark Carney's work on TCFD, we're now seeing, as was further announced this week, an acceleration of compliance and reporting requirements that weren't there 5-10 years ago, which I personally thoroughly welcome. But what that's done for us is made us go back through, and we're just about to report this shortly following our AGM earlier this year, really a detailed science-based picture of what our financing arrangements with our clients contribute in two main areas, which is fossil fuel production and power production. And those two have now been subjected to a really rigorous analysis, and I think this will be true for increasingly all the major financial institutions, to disclose exactly what mix of both fossil fuel and power production we are financing, and what is our transition plan towards the Paris targets. And that is not a trivial piece of work. In fact, it's a very major sort of fairly painful piece of analytical work. And obviously that'll get better and more sort of detailed. But the first time round, that represents a major level of effort for a bank the size of Barclays. But we now have that picture, which is that we will share shortly in line with the promises we gave to our shareholders to be able to update them. And I think what that's given us is a clear understanding of the trajectory we as a financial institution have to play to help the transition to a more sustainable economy. And that means very much not getting into certain types of financing like new coal plants, but it probably more positively, and I'll come on to this in a second, means that we can see opportunities around the world to finance new transition projects and particularly the shift towards more renewable energy and away from sort of particularly old fossil fuels and extreme forms of pollutants. So we have seen in the last 3 years probably more shift towards a sustainable finance requirement from our shareholders than we have before. And I think this is a global trend as confirmed by the TCFD being adopted and the governments around the world, I think prodded by Mark Carney and others, trying to sort of calibrate their disclosure regimes. So we have, I think, started down as a financial institution a route. But really the sort of second point I wanted to make was to discuss a little bit about what an opportunity this is for all financial institutions. And obviously this is a complex ecosystem of bodies here. But what I think we are seeing in the next 5 years is a major transition from an old style economy to a much more circular economy, much more renewable, much more sustainable economy. And with any transition, obviously there are some winners and losers, but there are tremendous opportunities, I think, for the finance sector generally, and certainly for Barclays, to finance that change, because there will be massive projects, huge undertakings to make the sort of changes that we're sort of expecting to see. And if I just take the sort of one of the big drivers, I think, is the governmental agenda around the world. This morning, Prime Minister Johnson has announced a 10-point transition plan, which involves a fairly major rewiring of the UK economy. And at a point when governments are trying to work out how to build back, unprecedented levels of investment and intervention in the economy will be directed towards new forms of sustainable economic models. And for those banks and financial institutions able to mobilize to help that transition, I think we're seeing a massive set of new opportunities. So while this is started possibly with a conversation around disclose what you're doing in the old world, I think we're now shifting into a much more interesting space, which is how do we finance that transition? There's two examples of that. We had in London last week the Green Horizons Summit, which was put together again led by Mark Carney and Christine Lagarde and others, who were really discussing now what the opportunities are to sort of enable finance to accelerate and benefit from this transition in the economic model. And out of that, we saw announcements by the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, about the green gilt. We've seen confirmation that TCFD will be required as part of the sort of UK regime. And I think increasingly we were beginning to see some sort of slightly further out comments about where we would go with possibly being able to capture what's called TNFD, which is nature finance disclosures, and thinking increasingly about areas like deforestation, biodiversity. So to my mind, I think we've had a really fascinating 2 or 3 years where the topic has become much more mainstream, much more clearly linked with real economic opportunities rather than being, if you like, purely the right thing to do. And to my mind also, beginning to be a point where we can unleash the sort of creativity and innovation in the financial sector to find new ideas and new ways of working. And I'd certainly encourage those that haven't already followed the Green Horizon Summit to look onto that website of what was discussed, very wide-ranging, and particularly to make contact if you haven't already come across the Green Finance Institute in the UK, in London, because it's quite clear that certainly the City of London are very committed to helping lead this transition around the world. And this is clearly a multinational collaborative effort. And hence one of the reasons I'm very pleased to be able to be here today. The final topic I want to just sort of talk through before maybe if we have time for some questions was the fact that this, I think, is the beginning of a much longer journey, and there are many, many aspects to sustainable finance, and it covers quite a lot of opportunities. But I wanted to sort of pick out a couple that I think we will see develop but are at early stages at the moment. And this goes back to my work with the Global Resource Initiative Task Force. And we are clearly going to see developments around probably 3 areas I would just sort of highlight, and where Malaysia potentially has a very interesting part to play. Firstly, I think we are looking at the more sustainable supply chains, particularly for the consumer countries like the UK to work with producer countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia to try and understand how we help ensure the supply chains are as sustainable as possible, and to reinforce governmental efforts in those countries. And we're looking at a whole set of initiatives. One we suggested was a sustainable import guarantee. So as opposed to traditional export guarantees, could we underwrite production which we knew was certified to be truly sustainable, and allow the better producers and more sustainable producers a better deal, and essentially a financial incentive. And I think what's interesting in that area is that there's a public-private opportunity, and the UK government looking at ideas such as development finance and various other forms of financial aid initiative to positively help a transition to a fully sustainable model. And that I think is going to be a theme that will be more and more important, that blended private, public, joined up thinking to create sustainable supply chains around the world. The other sort of area that's I think going to be increasingly interesting is the whole concept around future carbon offsets, and trying to sort of regulate the pricing of carbon generally. And that is a sort of massive topic, probably 3 conferences worth of speakers could talk about that for a very long time. But to my mind, there is going to be a whole set of interesting opportunities there, and areas where potentially Malaysia, with its opportunities to sort of participate in certainly carbon offset and carbon pricing, I think could be very important, very significant. So to my mind, I think the opportunities are only just beginning in this area. I think the opportunity to think about this creatively, to unleash the innovation that exists in the financial sector, and to work with governments collaboratively around the world is going to create some really interesting new sort of and different financial instruments and financial markets as we go further down the track. So I'm very excited to hear about the MSFI, and I thoroughly endorse the work that's been done, and encourage the fact that I believe this is very much a major set of opportunities for the financial sector to reimagine its role, to reimagine how the economy will work and how we finance it. And I think this is going to create a lot of interesting new ways for the finance sector to contribute. So with that, I will probably try and shut up and answer any questions I can to make sure this discussion is as interactive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sir Ian. I wonder if any of the panelists have any questions for Sir Ian? If you do, you can just unmute and ask.
So Ian, thank you very much. This is Oz from HSBC.
Oh, hi.
I wanted to, hi, how are you doing? I wanted to get your views on the sophistication of the board process in managing ESG that you see, whether that be in financial services or otherwise, and what would you say are the one or two even better ifs that all boards around and any board members watching this broadcast could do?
Well, look, I think there's sort of a couple, well, there's probably three quick observations I make about this. One is that I really do see, and I'm wearing a couple of different hats as a non-exec, a commitment to understand, organizations wanting to understand their particular ESG. So rather than just a sort of box ticking exercise of saying, yeah, we understand what our carbon footprint is, thinking much more deeply about what's the contribution we, as say Barclays or as British Telecom, where I'm also involved, and I think that is a fundamental shift, and it's been helped by the fact of investors such as BlackRock being much more vocal and much more committed to this than perhaps was the case sort of 5-10 years ago. So I think there's a greater willingness to go into depth, which is great. So it's not superficial. I think the two other comments I'd make is that there needs to be, as we've just recently experienced, a proper, I think, science-based approach to this. So rather than some sort of vague comment that we'll try harder or we'll do a bit of this or we'll do a bit of that, actually really getting into the detail and understanding what you do. And I think traditionally financial institutions have had a slight tendency to say, well, look, it's not us, it's we can't tell our clients what to do. It's not up to us to make these sort of calls. And I think increasingly people have said, well, actually, we are part of the system that needs to change and we need to sort of exert agent pressure on it. But to do that, you do have to be pretty precise about what it is you're actually really doing. And the third thing I would suggest is well worth engaging with is the colleagues in our operations care about this a lot, actually, and to really open up the internal conversation about what form of ESG, what type of interventions we should be doing, where should we be investing, how should we be developing. I think most people at the boardroom have been impressed by the level of interest and passion that people in our businesses have around these topics. So I'd absolutely encourage all boards to have a process of reaching out into the organisation to hear what they have to say, and obviously as well as our customers.
I have a question, Sir Ian.
Yep.
What has been the experience in the UK and Europe, for example? Are we seeing a lot more of activism following on the question about boardroom participation? Are we seeing more activism amongst our conscious investors, for example?
Yep, very, very good question. And the short answer is absolutely yes. I suppose the Barclays experience most recently was a share action resolution at our last AGM earlier this year, which has been basically a call to action, probably by a slightly more extreme version of some of the shareholder base, but one who actually had, probably for the first time, developed some decent institutional support, as opposed to being purely an NGO who would sort of throw rocks at anyone who was not sort of extremely green. And I think that's part of the shift that we've seen as the major institutions, the L&Gs, the BlackRocks have begun to really fundamentally take an interest and ask us to sort of disclose what we wanted to do. I think the positive note on that was that we were able to engage with our shareholders and come up with a plan of action in order to disclose and set a plan to commit to Paris transition levels, which was really well grounded, as I've said, in the science and the detail. So I don't think what we're seeing is sort of just extreme activism without, if you like, a measured piece of sort of work. But it does mean that the pressure is going to be on financial institutions now to disclose and be serious about what they're actually going to do, as opposed to issue just a general pledge. And I think that activism that I think you're quite right to highlight will increase, not decrease, because I think it's still sort of developing. But I think companies and banks and financial institutions can disclose back a sensible plan of action, and we are getting we had 99% support from our shareholders on that disclosure.
Thank you for that. If we have time, Sir Ian, for one question, we have
Yep.
one just come in. Which financial institutions do you feel in particular have been successful in this area? In
Yeah. Well, look, I think actually, and it's probably unfair to sort of pick out individual ones, but I'm, actually going back to previous contributor. I mean, I think actually HSBC have done a good job over many years of supporting action in this area. We've also recently had people like JP Morgan committing to very substantial sums of investment. I wouldn't say there's necessarily one or two people who are sort of massively ahead of the pack. And I think actually one of the messages I would share here is that there is a general movement in the financial world towards people looking for ways and means in which they can lead. And I think the encouragement is to get on that transition journey quickly, because actually the whole sector's moving. And if you're not involved with this agenda, you risk chance of being left behind. But I think what's fascinating is that there are so many different individual pieces of really interesting work. I'm working a bit with Rabobank in Holland on a really interesting sort of supply chain initiative. And actually there's lots of room in this agenda for a lot of different players. So I think there's a great deal of opportunity out there, as I said earlier, and a great deal of competition.
Great. I know you have another engagement now, so we will have to let you go, but thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you will join us in other engagements as well.
Absolutely. Well, my pleasure. Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Ian.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to try to bring you a presentation from welcome remarks from the chairman of the Securities Commission. So stand by while we load the video.
Sir Ian Cheshire, Chairman, Barclays Bank UK. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you who are here in KL, Malaysia, and a very good afternoon to all of you who are in the United Kingdom. First of all, I would like to thank Capital Market Malaysia and SC affiliate for organizing this roundtable and bringing together stakeholders from across the Malaysian financial and capital market. I would also like to record my appreciation to the Finance Minister, Yang Berhormat Tengku Dato' Sri Zafrul, who will be joining us shortly, as well as to our speaker, Sir Ian Cheshire, for taking this time off their busy schedule to join us here today. I'm delighted to attend and be part of this gathering under the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative, or MSFI. We have come together for a common purpose, and your commitment and support will be crucial to build a sustainable finance ecosystem in Malaysia. This could ultimately effect real progress towards a greener, low-carbon future for the country. In 2019, the SC chaired the Government Commission Malaysian Green Financing Task Force. The task force comprised regulators, institutional investors, banks, asset managers, and government agencies involved in green technology and renewable energy sectors. A key recommendation of this task force was to build a centralized green financing center of excellence. This recommendation was the catalyst for the formation of the MSFI in July this year by the Capital Markets Malaysia. The aim is to equip industry players with the capacity and knowledge for the transition to green and sustainable activities. The SC has long been an advocate of sustainable and responsible investing, as well as sustainable finance. We have endeavored through our regulatory framework and engagement with industry to do just that. Now, as we develop Malaysia's sustainable finance ecosystem, we are fortunate to be able to learn from early adopters in other markets. In this regard, I'm looking forward to insights from Sir Ian on the work that Barclays has done in this space. Various targets have been set to meet the global transition to a low-carbon economy. Malaysia itself has committed to maintain over 50% of our forest cover for the country's land area. The nation also aims to reduce by 45% our greenhouse gas emission intensity of GDP in 2030 as part of our commitment towards the Paris Agreement. These are tangible targets which the domestic financial sector can collectively fund and finance. As market participants and intermediaries, we seek your participation to direct private finance into projects and businesses that are accelerating the transition to a resilient and sustainable future. The Finance Minister himself reaffirmed the government's commitment towards meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in Budget 2021. And I have no doubt that the budget allocation and incentives towards sustainable finance, resources, and environmental conservation will support the government's aspiration in creating a sustainable financial hub. We all have a part to play in making the financial system greener and more sustainable. The objective of today's engagement is to discuss and agree on specific action items that the financial sector can support as part of their commitment towards sustainable development. I commend you for taking part in this initiative, as well as welcome you on this journey together. I hope that you will find the session meaningful, insightful, and productive. Thank you.
Thank you for that message, Datuk Syed Zayed Alba. Next up on the program is a roundtable comprising 9 key stakeholders within the banking and financial sector. Moderating this session is Stephen Nolan, Co-Director of UNEP Inquiry and Managing Director for Financial Centers for Sustainability. And joining the panel are Amy Morris, CEO of Maybank Kim Eng, Datuk Sharon Magzani, Group Managing Director of MIDF, Chris Dodwell, Head of Policy and Advocacy for Impacts Asset Management, Thomas Sau, Co-Founder of Gobi Partners, Ahmad Shariman Muhammad Sharif, CEO, CIMB Islamic, Anthony Lee, CEO, AIG Malaysia, Marcel Omar Pep, Head of RI Malaysia Conventional and Re-Takaful for Swiss Re Asia, Mark Junyan, Managing Director, Head of Client Coverage for Standard Chartered Bank, and Oz Ahmed, CEO of HSBC Amanah. Stephen, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Can you hear me, Navina?
I can, loud and clear.
Great. Good morning to everybody. Well, sorry, I'm in Ireland, in Dublin, Ireland this morning. This is where my family is based. So it's morning time here, and good afternoon to everybody else who's in KL or wherever you are coming in around the world. I know Chris and I are in the British Isles, so we're in the same time zone. Look, I'm absolutely thrilled to be participating today, and I found the chairman's words there quite inspiring. We all have a part to play, I think was his key message. We all have a part to play, and I think what I took from some Ian's comments, and I'll go through them in a moment, was how practical they were. And it's no surprise that Barclays is a leader in the sustainable finance agenda. It isn't an aspiration. It is built. This agenda is built into their businesses, what to do around the world. And we'll go through some of the points he made in a moment. But I found it, as I said, quite a practical intervention and an oversight from what a leading financial institution is doing in this space. So before we get going, Navita, just a quick one of myself, and thank you for the introduction. On a daily basis, I oversee the UN convened Financial Centers for Sustainability. That's a network of 33 financial centers around the world, all working on this agenda collectively and setting aside competitive agendas, working collectively because they feel themselves that collectively we can move the agenda on and integrate the Paris Agreement and the Paris Alignment into our own financial centers. I also oversee 30 insurance regulators who are also working together on this agenda. So on a daily basis, I'm dealing with plus 60 different institutions around the world who collectively are working on this agenda. And I'm thrilled that as part of the Financial Centers for Sustainability, that Malaysia Sustainable Finance Initiative is our latest member, which is just terrific. And thank you to Salina and Avina for joining us in the last few weeks. They join London, Paris, Frankfurt, Hong Kong, Tokyo, New York, Toronto, and other centers in between. So we're delighted to have you as part of the FC4S family. Before we get going, just in terms of what do we see as some of the agenda items and to build on Sir Ian's points, what I took from Sir Ian was the pressure on financial institutions to step up. And he talked, and Amy, you asked him in terms of activism and shareholder activism, and he was able to respond to that and the engagement that they are now having as an institution with those shareholders. And as he said, it's based around science-based targets. It's based around facts and the different activities they're looking at, which I thought was a very interesting point. The second one is that firms that are not engaging with this agenda or engaging, let's say, from a corporate social responsibility perspective, will be left behind. And that was another important point that he said. The world is shifting. It has shifted dramatically in the last 36 months. What was a specialist niche agenda has now become very mainstream. And we are seeing that in terms of different activities in the market and different policy and regulatory activities. And then the third one was there's a great deal of competition. And again, he highlighted Oz, HSBC, and what you guys are doing. But I also know, Amy, in terms of what you are doing in Malaysia and different participants here, you also got leadership in KL on this topic. So it was very interesting to take his points. The pressure on financial institutions to step up based around science-based targets. Firms will be left behind if they don't, and there's a great deal of competition. And if we can take that 1 degree lower from what we're seeing in terms of our regulators and our financial centers and the entities within, we can summarize the challenges around sustainable finance, because while Sir Ian was able to point to the opportunities and how we get there, there are still significant challenges, and we'll discuss this with our panel this morning around this agenda. And it's not a straight line per se, and part of that actually comes back to talent. There is a war for talent around sustainable finance right now globally. There are not enough people in the markets who fully understand this agenda, that at a practical level, as Sir Ian was highlighting, can look within the product book from a risk perspective, whatever that may be, and integrate the ESG agenda across the different activities within their institutions. But that's not, this debt of talent, or this dearth of talent is not just within the market, it also was in the policy and regulatory environment as well. Okay, so that's the thing we have to recognize is while we want to scale up, we want to achieve the Paris alignment as quickly as we can, we need to invest in talent at the market, policy and regulatory level as well. Secondly is data. And I think as you asked the question around ESG, it's the quality of that data that people are using to inform decisions. It could be better, it could be more consistent. And so there's a big effort now going in around the whole ESG data space. The third point is product development or innovation. As Sir Ian highlighted, unleash the creativity of the financial system to develop new products and services. And that is fantastic. The challenge we have there, though, is without the talent and without the proper data, we're going to struggle to scale up in terms of product development, but we are getting there. Policy conversions. We heard the chairman talk about what's happening in Malaysia and what the Minister of Finance is doing, and we'll hear from him later on. But there's a lot going on globally in the policy and regulatory space. And I think with an incoming Biden administration, we're going to see a lot more happening, and that will obviously have an impact at a global level. And how does that affect or impact on Malaysia? And then the last one, and again, I'm just summarizing from the top 5. I'm not saying this is a full list, but for the private sector, right now there's too many initiatives in sustainable finance. is the sense of private market actors. Which one do you sign up to? What does it actually mean for you in terms of staffing internally? So building on Sir Ian's point, it's very practical, how an entity like Barclays has gone about integrating this agenda, the opportunities that they see as an institution, but also Sir Ian as a global financial system, financial sector leader. To the chairman, we all have a part to play in greening the financial system, to those different challenges we see around talent, data, product development, policy conversions, and perhaps too many initiatives at this point. It brings us to today's session with the 9 leaders of Malaysia's 9 leaders from Malaysia's financial system. And we're delighted to have you here today. And actually, sorry, 8, and Chris, you're coming in from the UK, but you are a leader in yourself as well at a global level in this space. So I'm really thrilled to be brought together such a high-powered group today. I did the key thing, going back to what the chairman was saying, and when we see the briefing note for this event, it's been a very busy 24 months in Malaysia, brought together in July with the launch of the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative. So there's a lot going on in the public and private space. And what we're trying to get to today, which is the first of the 3 series dialogue today, 1 in 6 months and 1 in 12 months, is kind of in the time we have, what are you as market participants doing in this space? Why? Almost building on what Sir Ian was saying. What do you hope to do over the next 12 months? Commitments is maybe a strong word, but you're already, this is your strategy at a day-to-day level. So what does the next 12 months look like? How can the government support what you're trying to do? And then obviously the framework is TCFD. And I know several of you are already utilizing TCFD. So without further ado, let's jump into the panel. Chris, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. Just given your global view and an ex-policy maker within the UK government and assisting countries develop their sustainable finance plans, can I ask you just to go a little bit deeper than what Sir Ian said, perhaps, and just give us a bit more of an overview, please?
Sure. Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks to the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Institute and the FCC Malaysia for giving me the chance to speak. So, first of all, I just want to make a brief introduction to Impact, the company that I work for now. We really are exactly what Sir Ian's talking about in terms of one of those sort of people that's kind of grasped this agenda and is actually seeing the financial opportunities that comes from it. So, we got established in 1999. So, we've been working for 20 years on investing purely in the transition to sustainable economy, and during that time we've now grown to a team of more than 200 people. So we're based in the UK, we've acquired a business in the US, we have an office in Hong Kong that specializes in investing in the Asian market, and we've seen an enormous surge in appetite for investment into sustainable economy over the last 24 months, as Sir Ian said. Our assets under management have actually grown by 30% in the last year. So we're now at 20 billion, over 20 billion investment. That's in listed equities, it's in infrastructure, it's in fixed income, but all of it is dedicated to this transition to a sustainable economy. And there's been strong performance across all of our strategies. This is a sector that has continued to grow and outperform the rest of the market over the last year, and in particular in our Asia dedicated funds that are focused on China, Japan, and the ASEAN region. So we have, and in terms of talent, we think we probably have one of the largest specialist teams of analysts. We've got more than 50 analysts who just focus on this area. We've also been really dedicated to getting involved in policy advocacy. So we collaborated with the UK government on designing the successful regulatory framework that has led to a massive surge of investment in offshore wind. My role was created last year. So as you mentioned, Stephen, I'm a former civil servant. I led the UK's climate negotiation team. I then helped support NDC development, climate goals under the Paris Agreement, 15 countries around the world, including a number in the ASEAN region. And principally, I then moved on into how do you finance action in emerging markets, which is really what we're here to talk about today. So I think I see 3 real preconditions for the creation of a successful financial market in this area. So the first one is clear policy direction aligned to environmental objectives. And that is not just the role, obviously, of the financial regulators, but it's the clear importance to investors of there being that clarity of vision in terms of what in the UK we'd now be calling a net zero strategy, but in Malaysia would be your kind of low carbon plan. But it has to be underpinned by credible sectoral roadmaps that identify where capital needs to be deployed into the new infrastructure, the new technologies that are going to be the growth areas of the future. And I think what's really important is for governments to get a clear message that this policy clarity is essential for investors to then help identify how to mobilize the capital into those investments. You need to see where the opportunities lie, but also you need to have a willingness from government to help co-create the policies that are going to attract the capital into those areas rather than into other areas of the economy. So that's part one. The second part is financial regulation that is focused on the management of systemic risks. And that has to be supported by disclosure of what we would call decision useful information. I think there's a risk in the rush to kind of TCFD implementation that we end up swamping people with data and swamping companies with onerous reporting requirements. So instead, I think we need to focus on what information different market participants need. And for us, as the role of an asset manager, it's not to dictate the investment beliefs of our clients, but to respond to their interest in this area and also to give them the information they need to understand their risk exposure and then offer them solutions. So what we did 8 years ago was we developed something called Smart Carbon. And what that does is it looks at carbon pricing as a kind of proxy for value at risk of companies that are potentially going to end up the wrong side of this transition to a zero carbon economy, and then helps you identify other assets that you can invest in if you're moving your investment out. It's not divestment focused, but it allows you to keep exposure to, say, the energy sector while focusing on those developing best-in-class solutions or energy efficiency. So I think this focus on TCFD implementation really needs to focus on that risk analysis element rather than simply disclosure of information. And then the last bit I would say is picking up on what Surian said about a focus on climate and environmental solutions. So market participants need to respond to investor interest by focusing on the supply side and developing those products and vehicles that allow you to look at companies providing those solutions. And this is the area where I think taxonomies can play a real role. So we developed our first taxonomy back 20 odd years ago. And what we did was that basically we used it to identify the companies that were active in the sectors of the economy that we're going to grow. And I think this is really important for Malaysia as well to think about. This isn't just climate change, but it's actually around realizing the other benefits in terms of environmental improvement that will yield local results. So those are the three pillars for me. But I would finish, I suppose, by saying you need to develop tailored responses to each of the above based on your country's own circumstances, rather than just think you can use off-the-shelf approaches. So I'm all for convergence, but I think the idea that you can just take someone's regulatory framework and transplant it into your local economy is far-fetched. You know, for example, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's 10-point plan he announced this morning, that's focused on UK challenges and opportunities. Offshore wind, clean transportation, the renovation of our building stock. We heard from the SEC Commissioner that Malaysia's challenges around maintenance of forest cover and reduction of emissions in your key sectors. So you've got to think about how you tailor your response to your own challenges. So I think I'll leave it there, Steve, and I hope that's a helpful introduction. I'd be very happy to come back and maybe talk a bit about US experience or UK or European experience on some of these areas, but hand over to the Malaysian members of the panel, see what their response is.
Thank you for that, Chris. And I think that's important that you give that overview as well a little bit deeper. And so we're here to talk about what Malaysia can do. So Amy, if I can turn to you as a leading regional asset manager in terms of what your business is doing, can you give us an overview of what you're doing in the sustainable finance agenda and why, please, Amy?
Okay, so my conversation today will largely be Malaysia focused, although our interest is, of course, as a regional bank across ASEAN, The framing will also be in relation to our role as an investment bank and capital market intermediary, where we definitely feel that we can provide impact to both our investors and corporate clients. The sustainability journey in a broad umbrella is not new to the group. In 2020, for example, we have participated in 14 sustainability-linked deals that amount to almost $4 billion. But what is pivotal in our responsibility as intermediaries to me is that we are able to influence the shift in terms of existing and new capital towards investments that will truly help in achieving the Paris Agreement commitments. So within this conversation, what are we doing internally as a investment banking arm of a commercial banking group? There are really three focus areas for us. One is the science. We are definitely, committed to the science and in terms of ensuring that we have the right data and domain knowledge to deliver effectively, in our intermediary role. Secondly is, I know people talk about talent. We talk about our people because it is not just specific talent. It is making sure that our journey involves all our people and to ensure they have the opportunities to be right skilled for ESG across the platform, and also to be able to develop specialization in-house alongside our aligned partners. Thirdly is what is very fundamental is our value system. Our values, we are very much grounded by our mission statement to humanize financial services, and hence to fully leverage also our 20 years of very deep Islamic finance experience. So within that, within those three focus areas of the science, the people, and the values, what we have been doing internally, maybe very broadly, I can kind of bring it down to the next layer. What is our three internal commitments? Firstly is that we want to ensure we walk the talk through what we call an approach of ESG infusion, which we have developed very much and integrated within our 5-year business roadmap starting from 2021. That's largely because we do see that, in terms of how our expectation of what is the opportunity, we project about 3 trillion ringgit worth of ESG-linked investment banking deals and wealth invested into ESG-related secondary market. So huge opportunities for us. We will start off with also a deep dive into 5 sectors, which we think have significant environmental issues and impact on community, and to be able to come up with recommendations across ASEAN on how responsible transition can happen, including taking into account of transition risk and business model risk. In terms of our second layer of commitment, it is really about people building ESG capability and capacity. Here, what we're trying to do is to make sure that ESG infusion really cuts across the organization. And our intent is to be able to allocate 20% of our organizational training hours to ESG related training. And this will involve the gamut of sustainability management, sustainable financing, transition to green, covering sustainable supply chain management, et cetera, et cetera. The last internal commitment that I would like to be able to share is as a regional house, naturally, our research capabilities is very extensive. And so this is where we also, a commitment we want to make that we will leverage our extensive on-ground analyst network to ensure that we are able to attract either ESG investors, SR investors, and particularly impact investors by offering them or ensuring that we have accuracy of data and access to companies within certain target industries, which may be challenging for now, but which provides the opportunities as they transition. So that is, in a way, a nutshell of what we are doing internally within the Maybank Investment Bank group.
Amy, if I may, just 2 follow-on questions. One, how important, or is it important, is the TCFD framework within that? Are you utilizing it? And then secondly, over the next, because that's a big plan, but as you said, it's built on a lot already happening, 14 different deals already for $4 billion, right? And that's just the last few years. Within the next year, is it a surge here? Is this an acceleration? Are you going deeper because you feel you need to? So just one, TCFD, and then what do the next 12 months look like for you, please?
In terms of our support for TCFD, both the Securities Commission and the Stock Exchange are supporters of TCFD, and so naturally, as a public listed company in Malaysia, we are also supporters, and we have already started disclosing our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, albeit of course on a voluntary basis. In terms of our commitment, I don't think there is anything better to show our commitment than putting our money where our mouth is. Like as I've mentioned, our 5-year plan actually incorporates an enhanced 5-year CAGR on top of our BAU CAGR from the opportunities that we see, of the investments that are likely to happen within the region to build food security, agriculture, infrastructure, transition from fossil fuel related power generation, to more renewable energy. So that is, that's really us about, in terms of walking the talk, so to speak.
That's great. And I'll come back to you in a few minutes about what we see as next steps around public-private in Malaysia to move this agenda on. Ahmed, if I can move to you in CIMB, please. We had a great chat last week. And I know that you guys are leaders in this agenda. Similar to what Amy just said, could you outline what you've done to date and what you hope to do going forward? And perhaps, sorry, I'll start with those two questions, please.
Sure. Thanks, Dylan. I think as our conversation last week, I think for us, we've gone down this journey about 18 months already, starting from UNEP, FI, and so on. And I think really what I want to share with the panel and also with the audience today is actually the hard-learned experience over the last 18 months or so. So the way the group or CIMB group has done the work with regards to the sustainability piece is to focus on two areas. One is how to mitigate the risk from climate change and whatnot. And the other one is to maximize the positive impact. So those are the two broad areas. And the last 18 months, a lot of work was actually done on changing key policies whereby we can actually mitigate the risk. And along the lines, we learned a lot of things and also the shortcomings, not just ourselves, but also within the industry and so on. Now, to put things into context, right now within the group where I think things have been really effective in changing the behavior of the bank is actually to put in credit policies or whereby there are due diligence being done where the sustainability lens is being put as a primary lens. And from that on, and from that perspective, we then build up conversations with our clients in terms of what they're doing, the activities that we are financing, how it impacts the environment and so on, and also and how do we then affect change. So I think that's already been built into our normal financing process. I think more than just a single deal or so, that actually changes the conversation that we have with our clients on a daily basis. So I think that's the major change that we've instituted within CIMB. Number two, and this is actually the focus of the work going forward, is actually more on the positive impact. So we have come up with our positive impact framework. So we're now trying to create, implement this framework into how we launch our products, how we deal with our customers, and how we serve the markets as well. Now, coming back to TCFD, and I think TCFD is a very big, very important component for us, especially when it relates to how we want to mitigate our exposure to risk. Because one thing we realize is that there's looking at the stuff that we need to do in this area, how to mitigate the risk from transition risk as well as physical risk. The skill sets are not there. That's where, Stephen, where you mentioned at the beginning, capacity in these areas are just lacking, right? Not just within the bank, but within the whole, within the country and even within the region as well. We were fortunate to be part of the TCFD task force, which just phase 2. The report of which just launched was just released a month back. I do suggest everyone here to actually look up that report, the phase 2 report. Basically, it shows a gamut of tools and skill sets that you need to have in order to have an effective TCFD reporting and so on. Not just reporting, but also how do you want to go about measuring risk and so on. It was very clear during that exercise, in our participation in that exercise, the skill sets between the Asian banks and the European banks, there's a wide gulf within it. And if we are serious about implementing it in Asia or in Malaysia, this is an area that we really need to fix. Because without the skill sets, we can't even measure the risk, the impact to the bank's operations effectively.
Okay, Well, look, that's a very important point, and thank you for that. And I think, as Amy said, it's about that internal capability. But it's also, if I may, I hear you say the European or US financial institutions may be ahead, but from my perspective, at a global level, every jurisdiction is dealing with the talent agenda. There's a massive challenge here, and it obviously will underpin competitiveness as well of a centre at a regional level, not just finance in its own transition. So 2 key expressions there: mitigate risk from a transition and physical perspective, and then maximize positive impact. If I may now move on Oz, forgive me, we didn't get a chance to speak last week. Oz is with HSBC Islamic. Oz, when I was doing my research and as I've been working with Navina and the team, it's very clear to me that the leadership that Malaysia has in Islamic finance is absolutely phenomenal. And so there's obviously the HSBC thing and the story for you there around sustainable finance, that's what Ian mentioned too. But also from the Islamic finance perspective, is there a roadmap that can almost that was used to develop Malaysia as a leader in Islamic finance? And could we really bring that or elements of that process to developing Malaysia as a sustainable finance hub as well? Please, Oz.
Thanks, Stephen, and good to be with everybody on this panel. I think that, yes, there is a roadmap, and that roadmap was very much articulated and identified 3 years ago when the Islamic banking sector and the Central Bank of Malaysia went on an initiative called value-based intermediation. And at its core, what was it? It was to change and position banks from looking at just the bottom line to start to look at the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line is made up of long-term economic prosperity, but people and planet. And through that process, what needed to be looked at was DNA change of the institution from the inside. Now, what I'd like to do is take an example of the journey that HSBC Amanah has gone over in 3 years, what we've learned and what we've now done from this year going forward to pivot to accelerate that growth. So there were a lot of initiatives that bubbled up initially. For example, we issued the world's first UN SDG Sukuk for 500 million ringgits in 2018. We also introduced ESG structured investments on the wealth side. So we're looking at not just the financing side, but the liability side that you can actually have on this agenda. We also introduced new reporting standards. So the VBI disclosure that HSBC Amanah did at the end of 2019. And many of these things that I'm indicating, they very much have been replicated by other Islamic banks. But it does come down to that DNA of the organization. And what we realized that we needed to do was we needed to go back to purpose, to Amy's point. So HSBC Amanah changed its purpose, and our purpose was very much achieving sustainable growth to deliver shared value within the communities we serve and the environment we live in today and tomorrow. So we can speak to that internally and externally to change the frame of what we're doing. Then very much in line with how Islamic banking grew and what we learned from VBI, we instituted institutional change. And what were the key drivers of that? Firstly was taxonomy. We took the great work that HSBC has done globally, but also the work that the VBI practitioners have done locally to come up with a taxonomy that makes sense for Malaysia and for the customers we serve. That was one. Another area is not what you expect, but what you inspect that gets done. And although the VBI disclosure was a great start, there were a lot of initiatives such as the TCFD that can improve those. And that's a process that we are currently going through. But importantly, we've just concluded a 6-week training of 75 people within Malaysia, including board of directors, the executive committee, subject matter experts, and senior management, in order to understand what sustainability leadership and corporate responsibility is in order to have that mindset change. All of that is, of course, layered with actual financial solutions that meet the needs of our customers. I can't go into what those are simply because that would be a competitive advantage, but it does build on the work we did with bringing the first sustainability linked financing out to Malaysia. So all of those areas around taxonomy, disclosure, innovation, and mindset were all the 4 components that allowed internally within Islamic banking to thrive. That had to meet an external environment that allowed it to thrive. And I think that's where the real discussion is, and that's where the change and controversy should be focused on, and the even better ifs are, which I'm sure we'll get onto later.
Okay, so if I could just follow up there, because that's an interesting, I now know why you asked Ian the question around the board, right? And capacity building at the board level, because what we have are phenomenal members of different boards, but they may not be, as you said, experts or fully understand the sustainability agenda. Forget about the sustainable finance agenda, but the sustainability agenda first and foremost. And as Amy said, and used that word purpose, right? So can I ask you just two questions? One, your journey as HSBC in Malaysia and the overall HSBC global agenda, you know, have you been able to feed into that, almost the bottom up into the global strategy?
The best thing is that it's bottom up and top down.
Okay.
They say, what do you need locally to really make this happen, to become the group's first sustainable bank, and how can we help? Now, there's certain things that we're going to inherit. So recently, HSBC did announce that it's becoming net zero. That's on all three scopes, right? So that's our financed emissions and from what our customers do, and that's to be achieved by 2050, if not sooner. So clearly that helps us in terms of TCFD and saying, what the hell does that recommendation mean? What does that mean to me locally? We have 66 geographies that we can speak to that are asking the same question, and centers of excellence that support us there. And then also particularly around sustainable financing, to really up the game, we've said, look, we want to help our customers transition through this. So we're going to move to 750 to $1 trillion to help them transition over the next 10 years. What we can then do is say, yes, great, that's sustainable finance, but here are the features of the products we need to make it work here. And these are the sectors we need to point it at. So it's top down and bottom up. And a lot of stuff we've learned from VBI, we've also pushed up as well.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And if I may now, I'm going to move on to Sharon, who's the CEO of the MIDF Investment. And Sharon, I know there's this, you were at a dinner years ago in Davos at the World Economic Forum with my colleagues. Unfortunately, I was not part of that, but I know you had an impact in terms of your insight at a regional level around what is happening in the market. And Sharon, if I could turn to you, because I think that's a really interesting, you know, one of the phrases that that Oz used there was the mindset. And the mindset of the company, which starts at the top. And as a leader of your institution, where are you with regard to the sustainable finance agenda, please? And then the second follow-on question is in terms of the role in finance and transition and a Malaysian economy. Please, Sharon.
Gosh, thank you, and thank you to the SC for inviting me to speak on this very important panel. I'm rather overwhelmed, actually, all the very clever speakers before me talking about all the things they've done. We're a small bank in MIDF, but we do believe in green. We started, I think, probably at the first green conference in Malaysia 2 years ago, and we have at one point we were the leaders. We had the most issues of ESG sukuk, and we still do. I think do a lot of SRIs sukuk, especially in the renewable energy space, both in solar and mini hydro, as well as looking at buildings and making buildings more energy efficient. So we do believe in green and the whole and trying to make the world a better place. And then we had this conversation before, Stephen, about why we are trying to go green. Looking at what's happening in the West, a lot of the presupposition is that we should move to zero carbon. And that is the future of each country. And the whole green agenda is to, and including in finance, is to drive things to be zero carbon. But if you look at the Malaysian economy, the bedrocks of the economy are oil and gas and palm oil. And if you were someone sitting in Sweden or called Greta, you would say that these are terrible things to be in. We should. If we were serious about being carbon neutral, zero carbon, would we shut down our hydrocarbon industry? Would we stop growing palm oil because it's bad for the environment? And so these are bigger questions, which I think as a country we have to grapple with. I mean, on a small scale, certainly, if we can, given the choice between a project which produces pollution or deforests or produces lots of carbon, and a project which doesn't, clearly one should choose a project which doesn't. But that's on a mini micro on a kind of microeconomic scale, but on a grand macroeconomic scale, I'm still wondering how we want to take this forward as a nation, because there is the agenda driven by the Western countries where they do want to go to zero carbon, but those of us in the developing world, carbon is essential. I mean, you have to. It doesn't make sense to me to have to close down a coal-fired power plant, which is producing electricity for people who desperately need electricity, simply to meet some zero carbon targets set by some faraway country. So that is a kind of a bigger philosophical context. But again, as I said, on the micro level, on the kind of day-to-day level, the whole organization is committed to doing green projects. We also are a development finance institution, and so we administer some of the funds on behalf of the government which are promoting green projects. So we lend money to small businesses who want to do their bit to have sustainable business and environmentally friendly businesses. But I think we've all alluded to this, is how do we know what project is green, and how do we decide what is green, and how do we report what is green? So again, taking Malaysia, for example, aside from hydrocarbons, or rather oil and gas and palm oil, we also depend a lot on tourism. And tourism means, now that a vaccine is here and COVID means we can travel, and hopefully means we can travel again, tourism means many millions of people flying into Malaysia on jets, producing huge amounts of carbon. I mean, are we going to actually say that to be environmentally sustainable, we should stop financing tourism projects because they promote people flying in and people burning lots of aviation kerosene to come here. So these are philosophical hard questions. But to go back from this very lofty view I've been trying to have to more day-to-day basis, yes, we are firm believers in environmentally friendly projects, and we do our bit to do as many SRIS reports as we can. In terms of our legacy assets, fortunately, our exposure to fossil fuel burning power plants or companies which extract hydrocarbons, or to palm oil companies which are not RSPO certified is negligible. We're fortunate that way, and it's very easy for me to say that we will make sure that we will maintain that as being negligible, and we will increase our exposure to compliant borrowers. So, for example, at the moment, more than 10% of our exposures are to SRI reports, where they've been certified as being sustainable and green friendly. So that's the way we're going. But I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm enjoying the conversation here, and I'd love to hear more of what my colleagues are doing and how they feel what is the right way for Malaysia to go in this, and how serious we should be on being green, and where do we draw the line. So I'll stop there, Stephen, but thank you.
No, I think there's 2 points I've taken away from there, if I may, Sharon, is one, as an institution on a day-to-day basis, this is built in, as you said, to what you're doing. And you can point to the different percentages of what you're doing in terms of how you're supporting green, how you're supporting that transition. And that's key. And as you said, that is built in there, and you're a leader in this space and still continue to do that. And that, I think, is very important. But, midway through our panel, it's actually quite a good pause there for a moment. And it's not a philosophical topic, right? It's actually happening around us. It's happening right now. We can point to the science that, it shows in terms of the temperature changes, the climate, the storms, natural disasters. We can point to all that, and we have a good sense of what's causing that. But at the same token, as you're pointing out, it's how, from a fairness perspective, are we able to transition, globally as a society to this low carbon future, and not, impact on, for example, the poorest of the poor in certain sectors around the world, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at a per capita carbon production, the highest ones are Australia and America. So until Australia and America bring down their per capita carbon to close to Malaysian levels, why should Malaysia be the first to start going green?
So I personally feel that, you know, with vaccines coming in, this is going to be a discussion with this panel at a dinner table sometime next year, and we'll bring in the experts. But again, a very good point, as I said, halfway through this discussion, and you know, and I'll come back to Chris later on. But this is where firms like Impacts and Amy and her firms are now invested in the firms, invested in the technologies that actually will allow growth to continue in a sustainable fashion. For economies like Malaysia,
but should the entire Malaysian financial system, you know, focus on just going carbon neutral? Is that the right focus for the country? I mean, hydrocarbons are essential to the growth of the country. Palm oil is essential to growth of the country. Tourism is essential to growth of the country. Why are we letting the whole financial system agenda being hijacked by what's going on in the West? I mean, granted, the richer countries of the world have to bring down their per capita carbon emissions, and they should do that, and should do that quickly, because they've had the benefit of, you know, all this growth by just polluting the air, and it's time they did something about it. But why should we here in Malaysia or anywhere else in Southeast Asia put that as a number one priority? Is the number one priority of our financial system reducing carbon? I don't think it is.
Well, I'm not going to answer that question. What I do think is the financial system supporting the development of a resilient economy. We've seen with COVID the shocks that can happen to an economy. So maybe if we switch sustainability out to resilient, and we hear that expression, building back better, right? So again, as you said, a big question that a lot of different financial system jurisdictions around the world are grappling with. I do think, you know, into the future, capital is global, and where is that capital going to be invested, and people who own that capital can make decisions based on what they think is a good investment. So it's not up to me to manage that capital, unfortunately. That's Amy and different participants on this panel. But, you know, again, going back to something that Chris said earlier on, which I thought was a very good point, it's not about trying to bring what's being developed elsewhere to Malaysia and say, now you need to take this on board, right? So actually, you know, if we look at it from a Malaysian perspective, and within Malaysia, within KL, within the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative, is what is the needs of the Malaysian economy the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years? And that's the starting point, right? Now, that has to be done in the basis of, well, what's happening regionally, what's happening globally. Malaysia has signed up to various different frameworks, but that is the starting point. What are the needs and the future needs of the Malaysian economy to build it in a resilient way? If I may now, Sharon, if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who I didn't get a chance to speak to last week, Anthony Lee, who's the CEO of AIG Malaysia. Anthony, we just had a great discussion there with Sharon, but from your perspective and what you're doing locally, what are you doing locally as part of a global group? And, you know, how much are you focused on this agenda in terms of transition and your support to the agenda at a local level, please, Anthony?
Yeah, so look, good points overall, and I think you know, because at a local corporate level, you know, I would say honestly, we're still in the infancy, right? Because we have, you know, local interest coming from our own employees, etc., and some clients, etc. And obviously, at a global level, they're trying to look at, you know, which is the right frameworks to use. And we had, interestingly, you know, literally just a couple of weeks ago, discussion with our board, and we had some of our global people on it. And one glaring thing was that there were, you know, I think there's 4 or 5 different standards, and so there's not even kind of an agreement on which ones are the right ones to use. So everything is kind of developing and emerging, and I think it's the right thing to do. But I think going back to kind of what Sharon said, I mean, we all, you know, big insurers all take part in insuring, you know, coal-fired plants, etc. Some are saying they're getting off, etc. But the reality is we have to work out the transition plan, right? You can't just switch off, and because otherwise, you know, if something happens and they don't have any insurance, the whole thing's shut down, and, you know, the impact's horrendous. So we need to get down. And I remember hearing Ian saying that's where the devil's in the details, right? That's where it's really difficult to get in there and again find the talent that knows how to evaluate this thing. What is the right economic model to slowly move away from one to the other to transition? That's really, really what we need. And I think the points are, it kind of reminded me of many years ago when, you know, the West used to criticize saying Malaysia's chopping down all its rainforest. And I think, you know, the irony was the wood was being imported by Japan to make formwork for, you know, one-off and thrown away. And then, you know, arguments were then saying, well, if the West want to criticize, why don't they pay for us not to cut the forest down? And so I'm not saying we're in that sort of area, but I think really it needs the mindset. And I know we've had some discussions, dialogue with Bank Negara, and it becomes very obvious that everyone looks at each other and says, how do we really say that this project is green and sustainable? Right? Who's doing the evaluation at a day-to-day basis? So we do need a way of significantly upskilling quickly, so that we can look at that. Otherwise, I think we come up with beautiful rhetoric, and I wonder whether it really is going to make that impact quickly that we need, right? Because there seems to be a lot of urgency in getting something done. So that would be my kind of take on it. I know Marcel, my counterpart on insurance, Swiss Re are very big on this. I think you're going to get much more in depth if you want to go down that route. But we've all, globally, the whole insurance industry has been impacted the last few years by significant storms.
Yes.
So rates are hardening. You're going to see everyone's insurance premiums going up, unfortunately, as a result of this. So there's no doubt whatever's happened in the last 5-10 years is unprecedented. And whether you blame climate change or whatever it is, it has happened, right? So the data is there, the evidence is there.
And I think just bringing yourself and Sharon there, the question is the transition plan, for Malaysia, and what is the role of the financial system in supporting that? So it's not the other way around, right? It's where is Malaysia going itself,
right.
by when? And I know those targets have obviously been set at a government level, but what is because at the end of the day, the role of the financial system is to support that.
That's right.
And it supports the entrepreneurs, it supports the manufacturing plants, it supports the continued wealth creation within the real economy. Anthony, I'm just going to move on.
Sorry, we don't even have proper environmental laws, right? So when we have environmental pollution, no one's really held to task, and the fines are minimal, and even insurance on it is not compulsory. So we got lots to do.
Sorry, I've been on Zoom calls the last 6 months, and I'm still staying on mute every now and again. Maybe that's a good thing. But look, the key takeaway there is that that's not just a Malaysian challenge, right? That's a challenge around the world. And so, we are all trying to figure this out in real time. And if anything, COVID has shown us in the last 8-9 months, look what could actually happen when things go very wrong.
Yes.
So that's a good one. Anthony, I'll come back to you in a moment. If I may, I'm going to move now on to, you mentioned Marcel in Swiss Re. So Marcel, we had a good chat last week in terms of what you guys are doing at a local level, and some of the questions that both Sharon and Anthony have brought up there. I'd be interested in your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think thank you, Stephen, as you have mentioned, Anthony, sustainability is at the heart of the business what Swiss Re as a global reinsurer is doing. We have been on the sustainability journey for the last 20 or more years, and it's already embedded in our vision to make the world more resilient, and sustainability is a big part of it. As Anthony has alluded to, natural catastrophes are increasing across the globe, and partly caused by climate change. So it's really embedded in our whole approach on the business, be it on the investment side, where it's all governed by ESG principles, because we have seen also empirical evidence shows that returns are as high as non-ESG investments, and volatility is actually lower. Also on the underwriting side, where certain risks we're trying to phase out, such as thermal coal over time, and help companies in the transition. And thirdly, we also see it as a business opportunity. Beforehand, Sir Ian was mentioning that Barclays is a leading financier of offshore wind farms. Swiss Re is globally leading in insuring offshore wind farms, and there are other such new products and innovations we develop globally, and would like also to bring in to Malaysia, like solar panel cover and so. And here locally, our role I see is really to help the economy and the whole system in the transition, be it by creating awareness. We help some of our clients here on their sustainability journey, sharing what we are doing in Swiss Re, so hopefully they can take parts out of it. And also in developing new solutions for the transition to the green economy. Here I see the role we as a global reinsurer can play.
Thank you for that, Marcel. And that's something interesting you said about working with clients. And that's something that Ahmed said in CIMB, that you're actually going out and educating is maybe too strong a word, but you're working with your clients, not just telling them what you're doing, but the impact in terms of where this is bringing you as a firm, and will they be insurable into the future? I suppose that's a very big way of saying it, but that's kind of what you're saying. And that's an important part that you guys are doing at a local level. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, we are starting. I mean, I would say in Malaysia, it's still a lot about creating awareness, but industry is going in this direction. I mean, also as mentioned, VBI, value-based insurance on the Islamic side. Takaful is now starting on the same journey on the Islamic insurance side, and ESG principles, sustainability are also part of value-based Takaful. So that's another area. But again, what others have mentioned, this journey can only be done together. So we need to work together, be it with the government, their policies, and with other financial institutions. The insurance and Takaful companies cannot do it on their own. So it needs to be a concerted effort.
Just one final question, just away from the climate agenda, biodiversity. This is something that Swiss Re is putting a lot of effort into. Again, maybe unfair question because we're talking about the climate. Is this something you're also doing within Malaysia, or is that still at a global level? Because it is something emerging at the moment as a topic.
Currently, it's more globally, but we have got, for example, tools in place which our clients can use to calculate their biodiversity risk. So we have developed a quantitative risk score, also looking at the biodiversity risk. And if clients are interested, we can help them in calculating the biodiversity risk, looking into the future in the next 60 years or so. So here we can help them.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Marcel. I'm going to now move to a man, Thomas, who invests in entrepreneurs and has done very well out of that in terms of his vehicle. Thomas, just in terms of, I was very struck last week when we had a chat at a very emotional level. As a human, you'd really kind of picked up on this agenda, which is fantastic. But from the perspective of your company and the type of firms that you invest in, what are you seeing, and what are you trying to do with the firms? I suppose what type of firms have you invested into, and how are you trying to help them on their sustainability journey? And are you investing into more sustainability themed type products and services coming your way now? Please, Thomas.
Yeah, no, Stephen, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel with all my esteemed peers here, because I think I'm going to offer, I think, more of a worm's eye view of kind of what's going on in the ecosystem. I think all of you are kind of, operating at a much higher level. So I can kind of tell you what's going on maybe at the grassroots with entrepreneurs. So a little bit, maybe just a quick introduction on Gobi Partners. We've been investing into early stage startups in emerging and underserved markets for the last 18 years. We were originally headquartered in Shanghai, and 5 years ago, we put our headquarters in Kuala Lumpur. We have about 1.1 billion US assets under management across 13 funds. We now have 14 locations kind of across Asia to focus on these emerging technology ecosystems. Just in Malaysia alone, we've already invested ringgit, over 180 million ringgit across 22 early stage startups in Malaysia. Overall, just on paper, we're already up 2x. So I think early stage investing in Malaysia has been a good value proposition for us. Of the 11 largest Malaysian tech companies, we've invested into 6 of them. Some of them are household names that you may have heard of, companies like Carsome, Aerodyne, Easy Parcel, iStore, iSend. So again, I think the Malaysia tech ecosystem is certainly a very rich and robust. Now, I think the really good news that we're seeing, we just hosted one of the first tech pitch competitions. It was structured after the World Cup, a one-on-one field of 64 knockout rounds, right? The companies were all seated. For the first time, we actually had two brackets. One was around circular economy, and one was around Taqwa Tech, which was again focused on Muslim entrepreneurs and startups who were serving the global ummah, right? Companies using technology to serve the Muslim community. And so we were startled by just the amount of innovation that's occurring in this space. And so let me just give you an example. I'd like to give Stephen a real example on how I think all my peers here can help, because if we work together, I think we can make more impact. One of the companies that ended up winning, ended up in the top 8, was a circular economy company based in Penang. And what they do is they take broken rice. Malaysia, Southeast Asia, big producer of rice. Broken rice is a byproduct, waste byproduct. And this company is taking broken rice and turning them into rice straws that are biodegradable in 90 days, right? So basically a substitute for plastic. This is a company that we're looking to invest into. Now the problem, and I'd love to pose this just to the group, is Gobi can certainly put equity into this company. The issue right now is they're talking to bigger restaurant chains, right? The McDonald's, the Burger Kings, and it's a chicken or egg. The company right now can only produce about 1 million rice straws a day. But McDonald's needs, they need basically annually, they need almost 720 million straws a year. That's 2 million a day. Banks will not provide any financing, right? Because they need the cash flow. So again, if you look at this case, this is a company that clearly has a massive sustainability play. I mean, I think all of us here would love to take out 72 million plastic straws from the environment, right? Gobi can certainly bring in the technical assistance, the go-to market strategy, the marketing, branding, help them with business development. But this is a case where, again, banks just typically don't finance sustainable startups like this because they just don't have the track record. So again, if this is an example, maybe Stephen, a real life example on the types of things that we're seeing, and I think as Sir Ian was saying, the opportunities, you know, around financing sustainable companies. And I would just say two more things. Is just one is Gobi. We've been very focused on this. We built in an ESG practice for all 300 of our portfolio companies a couple of years ago. We continue to add there. We just added on someone very senior, a gentleman called Paul Ark, to help us on ESG. We have my partner Shannon focuses really on female entrepreneurs, making sure more VC is funding female-led startups. Jamal is focusing on Taqwa Tech, which again I defined earlier as startups using technology to serve Muslim customers, businesses, and communities. And my partner Carlo is focusing on circular economy. So clearly, I think at Gobi, we're seeing this opportunity toward sustainable startups. And we plan on committing and investing a lot more, but it can't be done just by the VC guys alone.
If I could just stop you there, Thomas. So effectively what we're saying there is what Sir Ian was saying is the financial innovation, right? And it's not as if this is new, right? There are VCs get a firm to a certain size and maybe Amy and her colleagues come in then and bring it on to the next round. But can I ask you just a question before I'm going to move on to Mac now in a moment, just to finish up in terms of the panel. Why did you move to Kuala Lumpur?
We saw massive opportunity here in Malaysia. We believe Malaysia is kind of a super connector for 5 very large business opportunities, big markets, right? First of all, Malaysia's key advantage is its diversity, right? Yes. So within Malaysia, you can easily, it's a stepping stone to Indonesia, right? Because, you know, there's a commonality with Bahasa, right? So that's one. There's a very vibrant Indian Malaysian community, so you can connect to India. There's also a thriving Malaysian Chinese community. You can connect back into China. And because, Malaysia, everybody speaks English so well, it's part of the British Commonwealth at one point, you can connect to the West. And finally, we saw Malaysia as this super connector to this larger Takwa tech opportunity, right? To this global, Muslim global economy. And we just see so many great entrepreneurs and innovation coming out, but again, just has been underfunded, right? It's been an underserved market. So again, I think that plays into this whole concept of sustainability, job creation, and making sure there's equal access to opportunity among communities that traditionally have not had access to financing support. And we think all of those trends, those forces converged here in Malaysia.
Okay, well, look, I think that's a great actual story in itself, right? So if we just park what we're talking about today in terms of Malaysia, why Malaysia as a region, but as you said, also say global opportunity. And I love that expression, super connector. And I imagine it was not just you who moved, it was your family as well. So you had to really sell it. You had to pitch it at home as well to make the move from Shanghai to KL. And that's super. And obviously it's working very well for you. So I'll come back to you in a moment, if I may. I want to move to Mac now. And Mac is the Managing Director, Head of Client Coverage for CCIB, Standard Chartered Bank. And Mac, I really enjoyed our conversation last week. And I was telling a few people about it that when we first started talking, you asked me to pause for a moment because the sun was in your eyes and it was lashing rain here in Ireland at the time. And I remember being incredibly jealous, saying, well, that's not something I've heard in Ireland for a while about the sun being so powerful. But Mac, if I could come to you, because you guys as Standard Chartered have been, the sustainable agenda has been, with you guys for a long time, and you are truly global leaders. Can we get your sense of why that is the case, please, Mac?
Sure. No, thank you. Standard Chartered has been an early mover, but let me go to why. We are a bit unique, and compared to some of our peer banks and so on, we are across 60 countries globally. But what's interesting is that a majority of the population live within 100 kilometers of the coastline, and the 60 countries that we're in, I think it's about 80% of the population, and the 60 countries that we're in, a majority of that are emerging markets. So our brand promise is here for good, and that's not just a cliche or a position statement, but really, we do feel that there is a responsibility to really infuse the sustainability DNA into the markets we serve. We were a very early mover in this space. Our ESRM was established in 1997, and we believe in the importance of being a responsible institution, and also managing the kind of negative impact of our products and services. Let me give you an example. If an asset manager or a fund manager invests in the secondary market of a sustainable bond, they're not necessarily adding to the depth of the market. But if they invested in primary, then they are. But even if you look at primary, a lot of the issuers in primary, green bonds and so on, a lot of that, there's still a lot of element of greenwashing, and a lot of the issuers, I read somewhere 15% of the issuers are actually kind of involved in other products that are not necessarily kind of totally green. It's just that particular issuance is green. So it cuts right into the heart of the DNA of banking. As in banking, we really felt that the need to kind of be the core, the center of it all. The Here for Good kind of pivots around 3 different pillars. Sustainable finance. With that, today globally we have about $3.9 billion US of sustainable assets. We want to be responsible. As a responsible company, we've got 55 billion. We've facilitated 55 billion over the years in terms of sustainable infrastructure, and for us to be zero carbon footprint by 2030. And then the third pillar is inclusive communities. In the last year, we've invested $51 million just to help the communities, and that has a reach of about 1.3 million population. So really, it's a little bit different to some of the international banks because we are focused on the emerging markets, and it is thematic. But I also hear kind of what some of the other speakers have said. It's easier said than done. In Malaysia, 90% of the companies here are SMEs, and really, if you look at the current situation, it's kind of survival or not. Sometimes priorities get a little bit misplaced, and if we cut across some of the countries that we're in, again, it's tricky, right? You have governments that may not have priorities in this space, and really trying to navigate the whole kind of the whole system is going to be a challenge, and we're a long way from where we should be. And for me, in Malaysia, we have access to, as a bank, we've committed $75 billion to sustainable kind of projects, and I have access to tapping to some of that for our client base, and we'd like to see a lot more kind of to happen. Sorry, Tom. Sorry, I've actually forgotten your question now. I just rambled on, so I'll pause here.
No. Sorry, you did answer my question, and actually, some of the takeaways that I've gotten there is, and this is a challenge globally, right? Is greenwashing, and that comes back to a lot of what the panel members were saying is the different frameworks, the talent around that, and there is a bit of a gray area right now. So some people, at a global level, taking advantage of that. And for just a basic question, and forgive me because I know you're not you lead the institution, but as part of the zero carbon 2030 ambition for the firm at a global level, what are the steps that you're taking at a local level to play your part and be part of that, please?
Yeah, so honestly, it's still very much developing, Stephen, and this is something that we started on the journey at a local level. We've got 10 years to play, so it is still for us in Malaysia in terms of Stanchart zero carbon footprint, it's still very much in its development stage.
Yeah, and I think, Mac, that's fair to say that for most financial institutions, right? Yeah. And I think that's what Sir Ian said earlier on is, while we have seen, look, it wasn't that long ago when sustainable finance was very much a niche, forget about specialist, but a very niche agenda, right? It has, left in the last few years to be, becoming more and more mainstream. We're seeing a lot more policy and regulatory activities happening at a global to local level. But again, it is still institutions with the best will in the world are still trying to get their head around what does it mean for them as an institution. And as Sir Ian said, and Amy asked this question about activist investors, that, it wasn't that long ago those activist investors were tearing up an AGM, but now you actually, as Sir Ian was able to highlight, you're able to have a debate, and it's based around science-based targets. But I think that he noted, how incredibly tough it had been for Barclays to actually get to that point. And I know that other institutions are trying to do the same as well. So you're right to point it out, Mac. We're all very much, and I think this is the key thing to note, correct, while it's been going on for a while, we're all still very much at the start of this journey. And therefore, that's why I would think, Mac, and I'd be interested in your comments on this, is it's not about jurisdictions and competitiveness and where is one jurisdiction versus another. The opportunity is still very much in play, right? For different jurisdictions around the world. From your perspective, Mac, and this is why I asked earlier on, and I'll finish up my discussion with the panel with this sort of question. From your perspective, Mac, and as I noted, Malaysia has developed a leadership role in Islamic finance, and as I asked Oz kind of pointed to there's a framework developed. It was a public-private endeavor. Ahmed and CMIB pointed out to me last week the development of the Islamic Finance University. So, deep investment into talent, development of products and services from an innovation perspective. So, Malaysia in the last number of years has carved out a leading role in this agenda, which is a global agenda, which is fantastic. So, the point I'm making, I think I'm trying to make, is that, you've done this in another space, which is actually quite similar in terms of the values to the sustainability agenda. What do you think now, Mac, will be a good way forward as an output of this discussion today to do the same or try to do the same for the sustainable finance agenda, recognizing, as Sharon said earlier on, it's about supporting the real economy and not the other way around. Would you have any comments on that, please, Mac?
Yeah, no, I empathize with Sharon's point about kind of supporting the real economy. I think, I think the key is, again, Malaysia is built on SMEs. So in terms of, the number of companies, the number of those employed, the SMEs are a big thrust. I know that, the SC has done a lot with the kind of SRI roadmap. the Joint Committee on Climate Change that the SC and Bank Negara have sort of institutionalized, have really kickstart the kind of direction where we're going to go. But I think we're still not really getting to the crux of it. The SMEs, the retail investors. I mean, even if you look at kind of investments into this space, it's mostly institutional. So a lot of education, a lot of kind of awareness, and really kind of what's in it for them, right? At the end of the day, if survival is not on one question, what's in it for me? Yeah, I know this is great, but I'll figure it out next year when things are a little bit better. So I think it's still very opaque, and it's not gone down to the mainstream. And whether it's education, whether it's further incentives, I think there's a lot to be done.
Okay. And I suppose my question is, I know within the Ministry of Finance, and we'll hear from the Minister shortly, but there is a push on to develop a sustainable finance roadmap for Malaysia. And I think, Maka, again, this is my last question to you, is I personally feel, and I'm involved in a lot of these around the world, and it kind of goes back to Sharon's point, but also Chris's earlier point, a roadmap developed by the local jurisdiction for the local jurisdiction in terms of its needs. And as you point out, 90% of the economy is SME based, right? So, I'm just kind of, I'm not saying it's apples for apples in terms of the Islamic finance framework, but I would feel that would be a good point or a good place to start in kind of getting heads around the table to look at what does such a roadmap look like. But again, back to your point, to Sharon's point, what are we trying to finance and what does the transition look like? So would you see that as a positive exercise, Mac?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think again, if you look at it from a kind of I know that sort of green sukuk, there are incentives, there are sort of tax exemptions, but we can go a lot further on that. And if you start with kind of a fiscal incentive around it, that would start to pull people's attention towards this whole agenda.
Okay. Chris, if I can just come back to you, because I started with you and I was going to go rapidly around our panel members now. That was the point that you made earlier on, that this isn't about bringing something from abroad into Malaysia and trying to force it. It's more so about development at a local level, but of course within the global context. Is that something that you agree with? Sustainable finance roadmap is a good next step to get the heads around the table?
No, absolutely. And I think I just want to come back to a couple of other comments that people made. I think we do need to recognize this isn't a West-East kind of distinction here. Mm-hmm. You've got China, you've got Japan, you've got Korea. All of these countries have recently announced net zero targets. This isn't something that the West is trying to export. Net zero is just a catchy way of capturing the idea of how one moves the transition forward. I think this is really, really focus on the opportunities, come back to this. This is now possible because the costs of technology mean that solar is the cheapest form of power generation in the world, but there is the experience of financing renewables doesn't exist. We talked earlier on around the talent challenge and the finite kind of human capital that have actually got involved in doing big deals on renewables. It just doesn't exist everywhere. So what we need to do is actually pump prime that system and develop that market. The risk aspect's really important as part of that strategy, and I'm very concerned that future investment in coal-powered generation risks being stranded and risks destroying value. You're seeing that in India at the moment, where people cannot invest you can't raise money for coal-powered investment, and everyone's now reassessing and that's because of the pollution issues raised, the local air pollution issues. It's not the climate issue. India wants to move towards solar for its own personal benefit. So then you kind of come back to this question around mindset. I mean, in the UK this summer, we experienced 67 days of coal-free power production. This is the country that started the Industrial Revolution, and all of our kind of, the wealth generation was built on that coal. We just moved away from it. We've moved away from it. We're doing things differently, and that's what we need to get into. So I think a sustainable finance strategy that is rooted into where Malaysia wants to pitch itself to be, the future economy that can link into the kind of the generation of wealth that lies in this transition, and that's about people have said that the transition needs to be gradual, but you need to kind of put a stake in the ground about where you're trying to head towards, and then build your financial infrastructure that supports that transition.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. So opportunities to focus, obviously from a risk perspective, and again, that's a good point about India, the stranded asset part. But where does Malaysia want to be? And that's a Malaysian discussion. But I think the key thing is that, as I said earlier on, capital is global, and it will invest where the opportunities are. And so sometimes you need to put a lighthouse up to say the opportunities are here in this jurisdiction. Amy, if I can turn to you next, actually, just on that. And I know it's a high level question and it still needs to be developed, but from the perspective of a sustainable finance roadmap and the way Chris just presented that, I got the sense from you earlier on that, obviously you're doing the things internally which are managing the risk, but you are seeing significant opportunities here in this space. And is it a good next step to try and, recognize or try, in the context of what the Malaysian economy, where it wants to go, developing a sustainable finance roadmap or roadmap for how sustainable finance can support that? Sorry, that was a very inelegant way of me describing it, but would that be a fair point?
Yeah, look, all roadmaps, and we always refer to this as a journey, right? They have to be very specific to the context. They have, a Malaysian roadmap has to be very specific to Malaysia. So actually, in my wrap up, I just really can't resist to respond to Sharon, because I have a lot of conversations with my team on exactly the kind of arguments that he's put forward, like why should Malaysia bear the sins of developed economies, right? Well, the reality is this, and Sharon, you use, I think at least twice or three times, three times the word philosophical musings or philosophy. So to me, my retort is this, right? 100 years ago, we didn't know the impact of climate change. We didn't know the impact of, bringing down our natural forests, right? But now we do. So it's not really so much about philosophy. It's really about science. And that is my appeal, that we root everything that we do, our perspectives, and understanding what is the Malaysian roadmap has to be rooted in science, because science, can illuminate with the data what should be done and what is right, what is risk. And definitely we focus on the opportunities, because the rewards are also equally there. The upside is great, but ultimately it is about values and making sure that we all do our part. By the way, Sharon, you got a lot of cheers from my team as well.
Well, look, let's then move on. We're all cheerleading Sharon, so let's move on to Sharon now. And I think that's a very good point that you've made, Amy. Science. Now we've got a few minutes before the finance minister comes on, so I unfortunately have to be brief. But Sharon, in terms of the discussion you've heard here today and the points you brought up, do you see that the development of a roadmap to support the transition for the real economy and the role, in this case, the sustainable finance plays, is an important next step to kind of pop out the type of comments that you'd be making and that Amy's team were applauding you on?
No, of course we do. And I think, the recent budget, it points to that as well. The government's allocated some money towards promoting green projects and trying to do more to reduce the risk. And we talked about the risk of lending to renewable energy and other kinds of green projects. So yes, the government is trying to do something along those lines. But but we have to face it, though. The Malaysian economy is based on hydrocarbons, it's based on palm oil, it's based on people burning lots of aviation fuel, flying here to have a holiday. And unless we really want to restructure our economy, first of all, do we feel we want to restructure our economy totally? And if so, how are we going to do it? But I'm not even sure we've crossed that first hurdle. Are we going to restructure our economy? Let others do the hard work first, and we'll follow on. I don't want to be branded a climate skeptic here, and I don't want people to go.
No, you're not. That's most definitely
putting me
in
the same category of those who deny other things you're not allowed to deny or question. I think we just have to think a bit more. I'm all for it. Given the choice between doing something which produces waste and horrible chemicals and destroys the environment, and doing something which doesn't, of course you choose the latter. But should we change our entire economy? We can make it better, but should we change our economy?
Well, let me just, if I can, because I know the finance minister has joined us, so we're going to be pivoting to him in a moment. And just as he's waiting to come on, I just want to thank the panel for all their comments and their input and their insight. I know it's late in Kuala Lumpur now, so thank you very much. I want to thank the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative for showing their leadership and bringing us all here today and together. And I think my point is, when I look at this, and you know, Sharon, I'm building everybody else's comments. Is it about changing the economy, or is it about looking out to the future opportunities for the Malaysian economy, and how do we get there, and what is the role of the financial system in supporting that, and in supporting the finance minister and his cabinet colleagues' vision for Malaysia into the future. So I really want to thank everybody, and I want to thank the guys, Navina and Selena, for the opportunity to participate today. Navina, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all the panelists for your contributions to this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our absolute honor now to invite our Finance Minister and patron to the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative, Yang Berhormat Tengku Datuk Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, to deliver the closing keynote address.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Right, thank you. So, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Syed Zaid Alba, Chairman of the Securities Commission Malaysia, Sir Ian Cheshire, Non-Executive Director and Chairman of Barclays Bank, Stephen Nolan, Managing Director, Financial Centres for Sustainability, members and representatives of the MSFI, ladies and gentlemen. So, very good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon, and many thanks to the MSFI and Capital Markets Malaysia, CMM, for organizing and hosting this session. I appreciate the discussions made from the roundtable, particularly in building the foundations for Malaysia to transition into a society that values and practice sustainable living. During these exceptional times, the death of the COVID-19 pandemic is still unfolding, as you know. Globally, over more than 55 million people have been affected. Recovery efforts are more challenging now, where countries are experiencing yet another wave of infections, including Malaysia. From a health and economic crisis, this pandemic risks turning into a social one, right? As business models change and jobs get displaced, the World Bank estimates that an additional 88 to 115 million people will live in extreme poverty in 2020, with the numbers increasing further to 150 million next year. This is a daunting challenge, but we have to push our efforts towards recovery and plan for the future, regardless of the looming uncertainties. It is an opportunity to reaffirm the principles that will guide us on our path towards a more sustainable recovery and start applying them today. So globally, nations such as Korea, Japan, and even China have publicly declared their net zero emission targets. There is a sweeping change coming, and we all need to move in tandem or risk being left behind. Some have labeled sustainability as a luxury that is only possible when times are good. Some even say that the efforts on sustainable finance should be postponed until the crisis has passed. I think they see only a status quo recovery. But the fact is in the numbers. The number of signatories of the Principle of Responsible Investment, or PRI, to promote the incorporation of ESG issues into investment practices across asset class has risen rapidly. From only 100 signatories representing about $6.5 trillion of assets under management in April 2006, the number has grown to 3,300, representing $103.4 trillion of assets under management as of March 2020. In truly understanding the dynamics of the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, the COVID-19 pandemic exemplifies why we have to accelerate our efforts in addressing the challenges of social disparities, climate change, environmental degradation, as well as biodiversity loss. It is very important that we start having the conversation on shifting from awareness on sustainable finance to implementation and execution of programs and initiatives to develop a comprehensive sustainable finance roadmap. This will position Malaysia to become a hub for sustainable development. It's now the time for us to turn these promises into action. Ladies and gentlemen, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Malaysia is currently in the 5th stage of its 6R recovery plan, where Budget 2021, which I announced earlier this month, is crafted to revitalize the economy. Building on recovery momentum from the ongoing economic stimulus packages, namely Prihatin, Prihatin SME Plus, Penjana, and Kita Prihatin, totaling about 305 billion ringgit, this budget emphasizes on building a more resilient and sustainable Malaysia. At the same time, Budget 2020 is the largest counter-cyclical expansionary budget ever announced. I think with more than 320 billion ringgit allocated, our objective is to safeguard the economy now, while continuing to invest in the future through digitalization, infrastructure, innovation, education, as well as initiatives on sustainability and the circular economy. Being a signatory to the Paris Agreement on climate change, as well as accepting the UN 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, the government is committed to put this agenda further in Budget 2021 to ensure sustainability of resources. Therefore, I heard some of the panelists talking about a country that, like Malaysia, who's rich in natural resources, and one of the 12 mega diverse countries in the world. It is important to balance between development and safeguarding our planet for future generations. Now, for the first time, I'm pleased to share that the annual budget is aligned with the SDG. Several measures announced for Malaysia to move towards a more prosperous, more sustainable and inclusive future, as well as to pivot more meaningfully into the areas of sustainability. These areas include creating a sustainable finance hub and position Malaysia as a hub for sustainable living. The government will continue to formulate a sustainable finance roadmap for this purpose. To complement this effort, and as part of continuation of our success from our social-related bond issuance, for example, the Sukuk Prihatin, the government will issue Malaysia's first sovereign sustainability bonds, or Sukuk, in the first half of 2021. I can see some of the investment bankers here smiling. Anyway, proceeds from this issuance will be utilized to finance social and environmental initiatives. Secondly, I'm sure you're aware, we have expanded the SRI, the Sustainable and Responsible Investment Sukuk Grant Scheme, to include all Sukuk issued under SC, under SC's SRI Sukuk framework and bonds issued under the ASEAN standards. In line with this, the government has also extended the existing income tax exemption for SRI Green Sukuk Grant to all types of Sukuk and bonds until 2025. Thirdly, we have enhanced the 2 billion ringgit Green Technology Financing Scheme, or GTFS, to encourage issuance of SRI Sukuk with guarantee provided by Dana Jamin, as well as extending the Sustainable Development Finance Scheme by Bank Pembangunan Malaysia until the end of 2023. A 25 million ringgit allocation has been set aside for the Sustainable Development Agenda, which includes a Malaysian SDG Trust Fund, initial allocation about 20 million ringgit. The government, through cooperation with the UN, will coordinate financing from both public and private sectors to contribute and be involved in efforts to achieve the SDG goals by 2030. Additionally, 400 million ringgit has been set aside for the Tahap initiative for the preservation of natural resources by all state governments. Of this amount, 70 million ringgit will be allocated for the purpose of ecological fiscal transfer activities. We want state governments to be incentivized to ensure the sustainability of the country's biodiversity. And lastly, 120 million ringgit for the various environmental conservation efforts, such as to address waste management, biodiversity protection and patrol program, environmental quality monitoring enforcement, as well as tree planting. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of our long-term development plans, this year marks the final phase of our 11th Malaysia Plan, where the strategy of enhancing environmental sustainability through green growth has been an important catalyst for sustainable development. To that end, Malaysia has taken the right step forward in facilitating a more sustainable financing activities. The Securities Commission has recently released a roadmap for Sustainable and Responsible Investment, where it acknowledges the critical role of the capital markets to drive sustainable investments in green and social sectors. Additionally, Bursa Malaysia also has launched its sustainability reporting framework, requiring listed companies to include sustainability matrix in their annual reports. This was then followed by the Sustainability Guide and Toolkits, which incorporated guidance that refers to the UN SDG and Task Force on Climate-Related Finance Disclosure recommendations. In this country, investors are provided with multiple platforms to pursue returns without compromising on the spirit of sustainability, both environmentally and socially. A simple example is the FTSE4Good Index on Bursa Malaysia, which comprises constituents screened in accordance with transparent and defined ESG criteria. Globally, investors are pricing in an ESG premium, which has resulted in higher market valuations for companies that focuses on the people and the planet, which carry the same weight as financial profit. It is fast accelerating mega trend, I believe, in investing. For the banking sector, Bank Negara is finalizing the climate change and principles-based taxonomy to help align understanding and assessment of risks by providing a common language to categorize economic activities based on their impact to climate change. This is expected to be launched in early 2021. On the private sector, we have seen companies like Petronas playing a strategic role in addressing sustainability issues by committing to invest in nature-based solutions or climate tech as part of their net zero carbon emissions target by 2050. It tells the story of how an oil and gas giant has turned to renewable energy, utilizing their technical prowess to adapt to the current demand landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to see that all these efforts from both public and private sectors are making a difference on the ground. Malaysia aims to lead in this space with ambitious policies by driving the financial sector's transformation. We need this and we need it fast. We want to integrate sustainability at every step of the financial value chain. Moving forward, sustainability will have a more prominent role in the 12th Malaysia Plan, which is actually at the final stage of Malaysia's economic recovery plan, which is reform, the 6R. This is targeted to be announced sometime in the first quarter of 2021. Delivering on the next Malaysia Plan will require mobilizing approximately 45 billion ringgit in investment for the next 5 years to achieve the UN SDG and Paris Agreement commitments. Furthermore, according to SEDA, or the Sustainable Energy Development Authority, 33 billion ringgit of investments in green energy will be needed to achieve the 2025 target. These investments will be featured prominently in the 12th Malaysia Plan and will be one of the major resources of new economic growth and employment opportunities, helping Malaysia to further recover better and build resilience for the future. The design of the 12 Malaysia Plans ensures the acceleration of Malaysia's transition to become more sustainable and digital-ready economy. I would like to emphasize that we are taking sustainable financing to the next level and the momentum for sustainable finance, I believe could not be better. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we acknowledge that at a global level, more and more investments are being poured into sustainable businesses in an effort to ensure inclusive, lasting benefits for communities and environment. It has been proven that it's possible to pursue the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. In fact, we can already see major sectors, including energy, manufacturing, digital economy, and finance, making the shift towards embedding sustainable practices in their businesses and operations. And there is nothing more on point than COVID-19 to demonstrate this principle. And yet, the world is still left wanting for sufficient funding to support sustainable growth. Before I end, I wish to highlight once again that the Ministry of Finance will be working on a holistic sustainable finance roadmap, and we will be proactively engaging with many of you in the financial services industry as well as the private sector to get the necessary feedback and support. I wish to also take this opportunity to implore everyone here today to act now. At least we reach a point of no return. Again, it is time to turn all these promises into action. So thank you.
Thank you very much, YB, for an inspiring keynote address. Thank you also to all our panelists and those of you who have tuned into this engagement. I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Talk
very
soon.
much.
Thank you.